At the dawn of the 20th century, America's forests seemed endless. Towering pine, cedar, and redwood trees stretched across millions of acres, forming vast green oceans that had stood untouched for centuries. In the quiet morning air, the forests felt timeless, ancient giants rising hundreds of feet above the forest floor. To many people, it seemed impossible that anything could ever truly change them. But far beyond the tree line, something was happening. America was growing faster than ever before. Cities were expanding, railroads were pushing deeper into the wilderness, entire towns were being built almost overnight, and all of it required one critical resource: timber. Wood built the houses people lived in, the bridges they crossed, the railroads that connected the nation, and the mines that powered the industrial boom. Every mile of railroad track needed thousands of wooden ties. Every new city block demanded lumber by the ton. The problem was simple. Humans couldn't cut trees fast enough. For decades, logging had depended on small crews of men armed with axes and long cross-cut saws. Two loggers would stand on opposite sides of a massive trunk, pulling the saw back and forth for hours just to bring down a single tree. After that, teams of horses had to drag the logs through mud, snow, and rocky terrain. It was exhausting, dangerous, and painfully slow. Logging companies knew something had to change. The demand for timber was rising faster every year, and the old methods simply couldn't keep up. Then rumors began spreading through the logging camps. Engineers were building a machine so massive, so powerful, that it could replace entire crews of workers. Some loggers didn't believe it, others laughed at the idea. But when the machine finally arrived, the laughter stopped. Because what rolled into the forest wasn't just another tool. It was a 120-ton iron monster of steam, steel, and grinding gears. And once it started moving, the forests would never be the same again.
Before the Iron Beast arrived, logging in the early 1900s was a grueling battle against nature, muscle, and time. Men lived and worked in remote camps deep in the forest, often hundreds of miles from the nearest town. These logging camps were rough, temporary settlements made of wooden bunkhouses, tents, and rough-hewn tables. Life there was harsh, unforgiving, and filled with constant danger. Each day began before sunrise. The men would rise to freezing temperatures in winter or scorching heat in summer. Their tools were simple but heavy: axes, cross-cut saws, wedges, and hammers. Two men would often work together on a single tree, using a long saw to slowly cut through trunks that could tower over 100 feet. Hours could pass with almost no progress. One wrong move could mean a tree falling the wrong way, crushing a worker instantly. Accidents were common. Limbs were broken, bones snapped, and in the worst cases, men didn't survive the day. After a tree fell, a team of horses or oxen would be hitched to drag the massive logs across the forest floor. Slippery mud, snow-covered slopes, and uneven terrain turned this already grueling task into a near-impossible challenge. One misstep could send a log rolling over a man or crushing equipment. The work was relentless, and the men who survived it were as tough as the forests they cut. Despite the danger, logging crews lived by strict routines and codes of respect. Everyone knew the stakes. Everyone knew the risk. Stories of injuries, near misses, and the occasional fatality were shared around small campfires at night, and the men learned quickly that patience, strength, and teamwork were the difference between life and death. But the forest was changing. America's cities and railroads demanded more timber than human hands could deliver. Even the strongest crews couldn't keep up. The need for speed, power, and efficiency was growing with every passing day. And it wasn't just about cutting trees, it was about conquering nature itself. The stage was set for something extraordinary. A machine unlike anything the world had ever seen was coming. a machine so massive and powerful that it would redefine logging forever. When it finally arrived, it wouldn't just speed up work, it would terrify and awe every man who dared to stand beside it. The Iron Beast was about to make its first mark on history. When the Iron Beast finally arrived at the remote logging camp, the entire crew gathered in awe and disbelief. No one had seen anything like it before. It wasn't just a machine. It was a colossal marvel of steel, iron, and steam, arriving in massive pieces on several rail cars. Workers craned their necks to watch as enormous crates were unloaded, steel plates thicker than a man's arm, gears the size of wagon wheels, and pipes that hissed as if alive. The sheer scale made the men uneasy, and whispers ran through the camp. "How are we supposed to put this together?" some muttered. Others shook their heads in disbelief. "It'll never work." Piece by piece, engineers and skilled operators began assembling the machine. Each day brought a new part into place: the massive boiler, the steel framework, the spinning gears, and the chains that would pull entire forests toward the cutting blades. By the time the last piece was fitted, the Iron Beast towered over the surrounding trees like a living monument of industrial power. Its boiler hissed and groaned, releasing clouds of steam into the chilly morning air, while pipes rattled with pressure, hinting at the power contained within. At 120 tons, it dwarfed anything in the camp. Men could barely reach the lower gears, and its massive cutting arms stretched higher than some of the tallest pines. When the engineers fired up the boiler for the first time, the sound was deafening. Steam roared from the exhaust, metal groaned under pressure, and the ground trembled with the machine's first tentative steps. Trees that had stood for centuries seemed to shiver as if sensing the threat. For the workers, the arrival of the Iron Beast was both exhilarating and terrifying. It promised speed, efficiency, and power beyond anything they had ever imagined, but it also demanded respect. One wrong move near its grinding gears, spinning chains, or massive hauling winches could end a man's life instantly. As the first logs were pulled and cut with terrifying efficiency, the forest itself began to change. What once took weeks of exhausting labor now fell to the relentless motion of steam and steel. The Iron Beast wasn't just a machine, it was a force of nature, rewriting the rules of logging forever. And for the men standing beside it, life and death would never be the same again.
Once the Iron Beast was fully operational, it became clear that this was no ordinary machine. It was a forest-consuming juggernaut. The moment it started moving, the trees that had stood for centuries trembled under its immense presence. Unlike human crews who needed hours, even days, to bring down a single tree, this machine moved relentlessly, cutting and hauling with terrifying speed. The forest itself seemed to vanish before its massive steel limbs. The Iron Beast combined several powerful systems into one colossal structure. Steam-powered winches dragged enormous logs across the forest floor, uprooting obstacles in its path. Heavy mechanical saws sliced through tree trunks like butter, leaving clean, precise cuts that human hands could only dream of. Massive steel claws lifted and stacked timber with effortless precision, turning mountains of felled trees into organized piles ready for transport. Each movement was a deadly dance of precision and power. One misstep could be fatal for any worker nearby. From a distance, the Iron Beast appeared almost alive. Clouds of steam poured from its exhaust pipes, curling like smoke from a mythical creature. The constant clang of gears and the grinding of chains echoed through the forest like an industrial heartbeat. Men who had worked decades with axes and horses watched in awe as the machine consumed the wilderness, leaving flattened trees and cleared paths in its wake. Entire logging operations soon revolved around the Iron Beast.
Human crews became support teams, cutting preliminary paths, securing dangerous logs, and keeping the machine fed with raw timber. Workers learned quickly that the faster the iron beast moved, the more dangerous it became. Logs fell unpredictably, chains snapped with lethal force, and the roar of steam masked the warnings of approaching hazards. In hours, the iron beast could clear what once took entire crews weeks to accomplish. It was not just a tool, it was an unstoppable force, changing the very rhythm of the forest. While the promise of efficiency was unmatched, it came with an unspoken cost. The men who worked alongside it had to respect its power, or they risked becoming part of the destruction themselves. The iron beast didn't just harvest timber, it reshaped the landscape, leaving no corner of the forest untouched, and proving that industrial power could conquer even the oldest, most enduring giants of nature.
Working alongside the Iron Beast was not for the faint of heart. While the machine's sheer size and power were awe-inspiring, it also turned every day of the forest into a high-stakes battle for survival. The men who operated and supported it quickly learned that one careless move could mean serious injury or death. Operating the Iron Beast required a team of skilled men, all working in perfect coordination. Engineers monitored the massive boiler, carefully controlling steam pressure to avoid catastrophic explosions. Operators managed the grinding saws, the winches, and the towering claws that hauled entire trees. Ground crews navigated the forest floor, guiding falling logs and making sure cables stayed taut. Every step required precision, timing, and constant vigilance. A single slip could trigger a chain reaction of destruction. The dangers were everywhere. Steel cables stretched under tremendous tension, capable of snapping like whips if anything went wrong. When a cable broke, it could slice through timber and through men before anyone had a chance to react. Massive trees, cut in mere minutes, crashed unpredictably, forcing workers to leap out of the way at the last second. Even routine tasks carried deadly risks. And then there was the machine itself. Boilers hissed and rattled, releasing clouds of scalding steam. Massive gears turned continuously, grinding and clanging, and no one dared step too close. The Iron Beast had no mercy. It was a relentless force of nature disguised as a machine. Men respected it, but they also feared it. Despite the danger, crews learned to trust the machine's rhythm. Every movement of the Iron Beast was calculated, and those who paid attention could anticipate its next action. Mistakes were punished instantly, teaching crews to be alert, disciplined, and courageous. Yet, even the most experienced loggers could never fully tame it. The Iron Beast demanded constant attention, unrelenting energy, and respect for its destructive potential. And as it roared and moved through the forest, it reminded everyone around it that progress often comes at a dangerous price. The forest was being conquered, and the men were living proof of both human courage and human fragility.
Wherever the Iron Beast moved, life in the forests changed almost overnight. The machine didn't just consume timber, it demanded a network of people, resources, and temporary towns to keep it running. Logging camps, once small and modest, transformed into bustling, chaotic hubs surrounding the colossal machine. Hundreds of workers lived in cramped bunkhouses, their wooden walls vibrating from the constant rumble of steam and steel. The smell of sawdust, smoke, and sweat hung heavy in the air, mixing with the aroma of wood fires used to cook simple, hearty meals. Life in these camps was brutal, but structured. Men slept in tight rows on wooden bunks, often sharing thin blankets in freezing temperatures. Days began before sunrise, with a shrill whistle signaling the start of work, and ended long after sunset when the exhausted crew finally returned. Meals were practical and filling: beans, salted meats, hard bread,
but never luxurious. The food fueled back-breaking labor as the men spent hours clearing paths, managing fallen logs, and feeding the iron beast's massive appetite for timber. Despite the machinery doing much of the heavy lifting, human labor remained critical. Workers constantly guided logs away from the machine's path, repaired broken cables, and adjusted the saws to keep the process smooth. The iron beast may have been a machine, but the men were its lifeblood. One misstep, one lapse in attention, and accidents could happen in an instant. Falling trees, snapping steel cables, or uncontrolled machinery could maim or kill. Even evenings in the camps were a strange mix of exhaustion and camaraderie. Men gathered around small fires, sharing stories of near misses, marvels, and tragedies witnessed that day. Laughter mixed with tense conversation as they recounted how close they had come to disaster. Many had a grudging respect for the iron beast, marveling at its speed and efficiency, while quietly acknowledging its danger. Yet, every morning, without fail, the whistle blew, signaling another relentless day. The iron beast waited, steam hissing, ready to devour more of the forest. And the men, tired but determined, returned to their posts, knowing that survival required courage, precision, and unflinching respect for the monstrous machine they now depended on. The logging camps had become temporary cities, alive with human determination and the omnipresent roar of the iron beast, a civilization built entirely around a 120-ton forest-eating machine.
As the iron beast tore through the wilderness day after day, the transformation of America's forests became impossible to ignore. Once dense, seemingly endless landscapes were reduced to stumps, fallen branches, and flattened clearings. Trees that had stood for centuries were brought down in minutes, leaving the forest eerily silent except for the constant roar of steam, the grinding of metal, and the snapping of massive logs. From the perspective of the men in the logging camps, the scale of destruction was breathtaking and terrifying. Railroads carried the timber from the logging sites to rapidly growing cities across the country. Lumber built homes, factories, and bridges, fueling America's industrial expansion at a speed that human labor alone could never have achieved. Every felled tree contributed to a booming economy, and companies celebrated the efficiency of the iron beast. Yet with every forest cleared, a piece of history vanished. Ancient ecosystems, once filled with towering pines and rich wildlife, disappeared almost overnight. Birds, deer, and other creatures fled or perished as their habitats were destroyed. The machine's power was awe-inspiring, but the environmental cost was immense. Entire valleys that had once been pristine wilderness were reduced to barren land, littered with tree stumps and broken machinery. Soil eroded from once stable slopes, rivers were redirected, and the land itself seemed scarred by the relentless industrial activity. Even the most seasoned loggers began to notice that the forest wasn't infinite. The resources that had supported generations were disappearing faster than they could be replaced. For the men who operated the iron beast, there was a sense of both pride and dread. They marveled at what the machine could accomplish, yet they were also witnesses to the massive destruction it left behind. The iron beast had become more than just a tool. It was an unstoppable force of change, reshaping the landscape and the environment in its path. By the time the first waves of timber were delivered to cities and factories, the forests had already changed forever. The iron beast had succeeded in its mission, but at a staggering cost. Vast stretches of America's natural heritage had vanished, leaving a stark reminder that industrial progress often comes with a heavy, irreversible price.
By the 1920s and 1930s, the age of the iron beast was coming to an end. Newer technologies, diesel engines, mechanized sawmills, and more efficient logging equipment began to replace the massive steam-powered machines that had once ruled the forests. Many of the original iron beasts were dismantled for scrap, their steel frames melted down to build new machines or railroads. Others were abandoned deep in the wilderness, slowly succumbing to rust, moss, and time. Yet even as the machines disappeared, their impact on the landscape, the industry, and the men who worked alongside them remained enormous. The Iron Beast had transformed logging forever. It turned small crews wielding axes into massive industrial operations capable of clearing forests in days rather than months. Entire regions of wilderness were reshaped, and timber flowed faster and in greater quantities than ever before. Cities and railroads that relied on this timber grew rapidly, fueled by the relentless efficiency of a machine that seemed almost alive. The Iron Beast didn't just harvest wood, it helped build the backbone of a rapidly industrializing nation. But its legacy was not without cost. The forests that had stood for centuries were gone, replaced by clear-cut land and altered ecosystems. Wildlife vanished from areas where the machine had operated, and for the men who had worked beside it, the memory of the dangers they faced never faded. Boiler explosions, snapping cables, crushing logs, these were risks that every worker carried with them long after leaving the camps. Many spoke of the Iron Beast with a mix of awe, pride, and fear, a machine that could destroy mountains of timber, but also had the power to destroy lives. Today, the Iron Beast survives only in photographs, museum displays, and scattered relics hidden in abandoned forests. Its story is a reminder of human ingenuity, industrial ambition, and the extraordinary but sometimes perilous relationship between man and machine. The machine that once ate entire forests left behind a legacy that reshaped an industry, altered the natural world, and became a symbol of both progress and peril. The Iron Beast is gone, but its roar echoes through history, a testament to the power, danger, and relentless drive of an industrial age that would never forget it.